Okay, let's talk about Sauron. Yeah, let's talk about Sauron. Let's talk about Rings of Power again. Let's talk about kind of what I alluded to in my last Rings of Power video. Um, yeah, the issue of Sauron. Because I think for me, the problem that I have with Rings of Power, and by problems, I mean one of the problems, because I have a lot of problems with Rings of Power, but one of the biggest problems I have with Rings of Power is their usage of Sauron. And it kind of goes to the disgusting trope that's popped up, which is the misunderstood villain. Now, I think, and I talked about this in, my conversation about tropes, but there is a way that you can do a misunderstood villain. But I don't think that is usually done very well. And that's really kind of a problem because with Rings of Power, absolutely Sauron is a villain. By the Second Age, Sauron very much is a villain. The damage that Sauron did during the Second Age is incredible when you read the Silmarillion. So very much there's nothing sympathetic to be had about Sauron. And so to have Rings of Power come out and do this atrocity of trying to make him be sympathetic and make the viewers empathize with him. And of course, it boils down to their first season's stupid mystery box of who was Sauron, of which nobody actually cared. It would have been a stronger, let me stop myself. Let me stop myself. Let me stop myself. Let me stop myself. Because I'm going into an area that I don't want to go into right now. But we know that Sauron is the enemy. And we know that him having been done right would have been us seeing him really operate as Anatar of the Gifts, or, operating in why is it escaping me? Well, anyway, if we saw Sauron being Sauron, meaning if we saw Sauron being manipulative, if we saw Sauron sowing seeds of discord, if we saw Sauron actually do the things that Sauron did at the time that he did, I do think that Rings of Power would have been a much better story. But I suppose the problem that I have is the Sauron that I see being needed for a story, for a Second Age series, would make him more the main character. And of course, that can't be because we have to have girl boss Galadriel, right? So, so I understand that I am definitely already barking up the wrong tree because I'm putting the attention in the place where it needs to be instead of where they decided to put it. But yeah, either way, it basically does tell me that this is why I think Rings of Power is kind of failing. And, the reason I stopped myself earlier is because I had a thought for doing a series. And basically because I know season three is going to be coming out. And I'm kind of, I don't know, let me say, being wishy washy about it. And I'm being wishy washy about it because doing the series I have in mind requires me to watch Rings of Power from beginning to end. And I really, 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 really don't want to do that. I really don't want to do that. So I'm having a very hard time because I don't want to watch Rings of Power. I watched the first episode. I will always say that. I watched the first episode, but I technically gave up in the first few seconds of the show because looking at Galadriel irritated the mess out of me. So it's a lot harder to want to watch a show that I'm already irritated at. And just looking at the kind of things that I've seen, in review, in terms of review and whatnot of the rest of the seasons, just really kind of convinces me that I really have no business watching it because I don't want to watch what I don't want to watch, and I just have strong dislikes, and I don't like to torture myself. So I can't say that the series will ever be made, but because I have accepted that Rings of Power is just one bad fan fiction, I wondered if I could get myself through it and, take sort of notes from a different perspective because I know that I know that calling it bad fan fiction means you just cut out all canon, because it's not canon at all. Like there's so much that's happening, and by so much I mean everything that's happening has nothing to do with canon. So it should be a lot easier to take care of the series the way that I'm thinking about doing it by forgetting canon and looking at it as its own self. But I've maintained that I think even if I look at it from its own perspective, I just think the show is very boring because I think over the 2 seasons, if you boil things down, nothing happened whatsoever. Nothing of consequence happened. And going back to the Sauron problem, all we had was an uninteresting Sauron and a more interesting Adar, who's now gone because, oh, right, Sauron's supposed to be the enemy, right? But is he really going to be the enemy season 3, or are we going to find some other way of creating some other enemies so that we can still create an uninteresting, possibly misunderstood Sauron so that the screenwriters and showrunners can, I don't know, fulfill some fantasy that they had that Sauron was not really that bad, even though Sauron was the second biggest baddie in Middle Earth? Like, you know, I don't know. I don't know. So yeah, I guess to recap, the biggest problem that Rings of Power has is that it has a powerless Sauron, and there's just no mistaking that. Sauron just he's powerless. He makes no sense. There's nothing about him that is interesting. There's nothing about him that screams enemy. There's nothing about him that screams scary. You know, terrifying. There's nothing that would make me there was nothing that makes me think that he had applied the amount of pressure that was necessary to bring us into the actions of the Lord of the Rings. And yeah, it is definitely a failing of the show writers because let's be honest, of course it's a failing of the show writers. These are show writers that outright said they wanted their piece of crap to sit on the same shelves as the giants of of Lord of the Rings, i.e. the books. And, to a lesser degree, a far lesser degree, the Peter Jackson films. Like they really thought that they could sit on the shoulders of giants and somehow make their work relevant that way. And yeah, when you can't even get Sauron right, when you can't even get the bad guy right, because if you compare notes, the biggest villain in Rings of Power will always be Galadriel. like what she did to damage Middle Earth cannot be undone. We have literally made her the reason the rings exist. So yeah, I'm sorry, you can't convince me that Sauron, as presented to me by Rings of Power, is any sort of bad guy that is of any consequence because, the first season we're supposed to pretend that we don't know who Sauron is. The second season, he still, you know, couldn't even be bothered because we had to get the whole backstory about how he just had to be a good person. You know, whatever. I'll marry the two tropes together, right? The misunderstood villain and the weakness of Sauron. But yeah, on its head, the biggest problem that I have with Rings of Power is Sauron and their lack of ability to understand what a villain actually is because they don't understand what a hero is. Because if you can't even understand what a hero is, then obviously you will not understand what a villain is. And, because they want us to believe that Galadriel is a hero when she clearly is a villain, obviously they wouldn't know what to do with a villain. So yeah, it's not even close, right? It's not even close. If you look, like if you, I mean, it's not even close. I can't even really have anything else to say other than, yeah, if I manage to do the series as I was thinking, it's going to take time because I'm going to have to motivate myself. But I don't really think motivation exists. So I'm going to have to force myself to do what I don't want to do and hope that it works out in a way that I can push through, even though I don't want to do it. And I don't know if that's going to happen. So, yeah, you get this for the moment, right? You get this for the moment. My distaste for Rings of Power and my distaste for the character of Sauron in the Rings of Power. So, yeah, that's kind of it's kind of what I've got. And yeah, as always, thank you if you listened this far. And I'll see you on the next video.